What's up guys, welcome to another week's episode of GetPsyched. It's great to be back after a little bit of a break over Christmas and New Year. I hope you guys had a great break. I know I did, but it feels really good to get back into some GetPsyched work. So this week we're kicking off with how to speak to children about mental health. This could be your children, this could be children in general. I think this topic is so important because you don't need me to remind you that the statistics in mental health amongst young people seem to be increasing, or mental illness amongst young people rather, seem to be increasing by the year. And this can be a really difficult topic for many adults to grasp. Sometimes it can feel kind of fuzzy or a little bit grey with how exactly to talk about mental health and how to pitch the topic to some young people. So on this week's episode of GetPsyched, we're going to take a look at some of my top tips on how to speak to young people about mental health. The first thing I would say is you need to cover the basics. You need to inform young people about what mental health is all about. Even using comparisons and metaphors like physical illness and comparing that to mental illness in order to cover those basics can be really helpful. Now, don't get me wrong. I know that there can be some bit of limitation, a little bit of grey area when we try and compare physical illness to mental illness, but we can use it as a good metaphor for young people to get them to understand that mental illness is a real thing. And that's what I mean by covering the basics. We need to get young people to understand that mental health is a thing and that actually feeling difficulties with our mental health is perfectly normal and it's okay. That's why it's so important to make sure that you cover those basics first. The next point is to be aware of your pitch. Now, this is one of the difficulties that many adults have when actually talking to young people about mental health, is how exactly do I pitch this? Another issue that we have is that young people have a very wide age range demographic of around about 16 years, obviously, from 0 to 16. Now, within that age range, there's so many different developmental stages. It can be so difficult to know exactly how to pitch the topic of mental health to a young person based on their age. Now, we could go into all kinds of conversations and ideas about different developmental stages and what to say when, but if you're working with somebody who's very young, you want to make sure that you get to their level, using metaphors and analogies that they can understand. Even using figures and toys to help illustrate the topic of mental health can be really beneficial. If you're talking to somebody more in an adolescent developmental stage, maybe towards the kind of 10 to 15, 16 age range, getting to them on their level but talking to them more as an adult is also really appropriate. I see a lot of young people in therapy myself, and one of the barriers to talking to them about mental health is actually treating them like a child. Often what we have to do is we've got to talk to them like adults. We've got to show respect, and we've got to be able to cover those basic principles about mental health on their level. Following on from that about pitching it in the right way, we have to pitch it at the right time. Knowing your timing of when to talk about the topic of mental health is really important. You never know what kind of time a young person is in and how sensitive they might be to the topic of mental health. Make sure to check in with that young person. Ask them how their day has been, for example, maybe how their week's been, how school has been, how their friendships and families have been going on, how things like that are happening, and then you'll get a better idea of when the right time is to pitch a conversation about mental health. Another thing, this could be applicable to you if you're a parent or if you're a teacher or if you're just a close relative or friend or something like that, is to ensure that there's a confidential nature to your conversation. You've got to ensure that you're not being overheard by too many people, or that, when sensitive information about mental health can come to the surface, that you have appropriate support near you. So having support, making sure your timing's right, and ensuring the elements of confidentiality is really important whenever we're talking about mental health to young people. Another point I would say here is don't just leave this conversation for when things go wrong. I think that's one of the pitfalls that many adults can get into, is that they can see that a young person, maybe their young person, their child or somebody they work with, is starting to struggle with some mental health difficulties, then they think it's the right time to talk about mental health. I don't want to say that it's too late then, because of course there's value in talking about mental illness and mental health when a young person is suffering from mental health difficulties, but it's definitely the case that you want to do your work early. You want to get that conversation in when things seem perfectly normal. I see a lot of clients in therapy, and often what happens is clients start to experience real benefits, and they think that once they feel beneficial or when they feel better, then it's time to end therapy. Actually, that's one of the times that we can get the most valuable therapeutic work done, when people actually are feeling a lot better from their mental health difficulties. It's the same with young people. Don't just leave this conversation for when things get bad. Try and have the conversation when things are kind of stable, when they're normal, and that you can have a really positive interaction about mental health with young people. My next point here, and I think this one is really important, is to embody the topic that you're discussing. So when we're talking about mental health, one of the things that we want young people to feel comfortable in doing is to be open and honest with the right person in order to receive the right support. You have to embody that as well in your daily life if you're around that young person regularly, like I said, if you're a parent or if you're a teacher, but also during that conversation. If you're closed or if you're reserved or if you put all the content on that young person, they're going to be able to receive that. They're going to understand what you're doing. It's really important that you're willing to be open, to be vulnerable, and to be honest about your topic in mental health, and maybe even give some personal experience about what mental health and mental illness has maybe been like for you. That's the kind of thing that could be really, really valuable when talking about mental health to a young person. Another thing I would say here is to use examples that young people can understand. It kind of goes into what we talked about, pitching it to the right audience. You know, if you're working with someone really young or someone in the adolescent stages, it's really important to use examples that they can relate to. So for example, if you're working with somebody very, very young, you might use toys or you might use illustrations to help with that. I know I've done that in therapy before and that's been really helpful. When you're working with someone a little older in the adolescent stage, again, there's metaphors and examples that you might want to use that can be beneficial there too. I'm always reminded of the black dog analogy, and you can go onto YouTube and find the videos about the black dog. I think actually it was Winston Churchill who first coined that term about the black dog being this depression that follows you around. And there's been books written about it and online articles as well. You won't find it difficult to find information on that. That can be a really useful metaphor when working with older children, because they can kind of get to grips with what mental health or depression is actually all about via the use of metaphors. And again, sometimes the physical health, mental health analogy can be quite beneficial here. I know often there can be limitations between, depression is not like having a broken leg, but in some ways it is to some degree. And if that helps a young person grasp the concept of mental health, then it's useful. So make sure to use examples that will relate to that young person and that they can absorb and help them understand about mental health. My next point here is to keep an open door policy. Once you have that conversation, that shouldn't just be the end of your interaction with that young person about mental health. Ensuring that they know that they can receive support from you if you're willing to do that and if you're able to do that, then letting them know that there's an open door policy for them to come and talk to you about mental health difficulties is really, really appropriate. One of the key points in having discussions about young people and mental health, not only is it vital that we start doing this more, but we need to let them know that it doesn't end at that discussion. It doesn't end once that discussion is over. They need to know where they can receive more support, and they need to know how to receive that support. Even directing them to online services or telephone services that are applicable for young people, that can be really beneficial too, and that definitely has a place. But letting them know that there's an open door policy that they can come and talk to you again about mental health or about mental illness, then that's only a good thing. One of the key things that's kind of related to that is to get them to know that there is support out there and how to access that support. And I think at this point, that's when you start talking about therapy. That's when you start talking about having more social interaction with other people, all the kind of things that benefit mental health, things like exercise, eating well, sleep, these kind of things. That's when you got to really kind of let young people know that actually, the conversation doesn't end here. Mental health, there's support services for that everywhere that you can look. There's plenty of support services for that kind of thing. Letting them know that those support services exist and how to access them is really, really important. My last point here, and this goes for having that conversation, it goes for after the conversation, it goes for all your interaction with young people, is to ask them how they feel. Ask them how they're doing and validate those feelings. I want to get this across. Just because you're having that conversation about mental health or mental illness with a young person, it's really important to get across to them that there's not something wrong with them. You have to validate how they feel. You have to let them know that they're not alone. And that comes into where you need to be embodying what you're talking about and being open and honest and congruent and willing to be vulnerable as well. When young people know that they're not alone, it can have such a positive impact on their mental health. So validate, ask them how they're feeling, and ensure that they know that they're not alone. Okay guys, thanks so much for watching this week's episode of GetPsyched. It feels really good to be back. I'm hoping that you enjoyed today's video. We looked at how to talk to young people and children about mental health difficulties. If you've enjoyed today's video, guys, then you're definitely going to enjoy this video on Are Mental Health Issues Genetic? You can click on this video here and take a look. And if you've been enjoying GetPsyched as a whole, don't forget to subscribe to us. You can click this little link here and subscribe to us. You can hit that little bell next to the subscribe button as well and get weekly reminders every time we upload. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and hopefully catch you next week.